Is fasted training worth it? I talk about this topic with registered dietitian and pro cross racer Emily Shields. We also look at some female specific topics such as tracking your menstrual cycle. Is it even worth changing your training based on your cycle? We talk about some fads in training. We talk about supplements. And if you want to get in the nitty gritty of a specific topic, look below in the show notes. But honestly, I think this podcast has a ton of tips that you can use to implement in your own training and racing. Emily, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. Everybody, good luck with the training. Good luck with the racing. Go crush it. Take care. Well, this is good. Let's start there. Who's Emily Shields? And then I have a bunch of questions for you.
Okay. Okay, well, my name's Emily. So I am a registered dietitian, but I'm also a professional cyclist. I primarily race cyclocross, but in college, I raced all of them for collegiate, road, mountain bike, cyclocross. And then I did my undergrad at Leeds McRae College in Banner Elk, North Carolina. And then I went on to get my master's in nutrition at UNC Greensboro. And then after that, I did my dietetic internship, became a dietitian. But then I wanted to also continue to race and really focus more on racing professionally. So I do that now, but I also have my own sports nutrition practice. It's Emily Shields Sports Nutrition, but I'm sure you can put that in the notes.
We'll put it in the notes for sure.
Correct.
What drew you into this? What drew you into that field? Was it through your racing, or was this something that you had always been involved with before you went to school?
No, in high school, yeah, I definitely didn't see myself becoming a dietitian. I mean, even in college, like undergrad, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I knew something science related. So my major for undergrad was biology. And then there was one nutrition professor, at least McRae, like there was no nutrition major or anything, but you could minor in nutrition. And there was one professor I really liked. And so I took all the nutrition classes with him. And definitely more thinking about the impact it could have on performance, and my cycling is what drove that more.
What do you remember? What were some of the early nuggets that was a light bulb? Like, oh, I'm doing this wrong. How did I not know this?
That's a good question. I would say probably not fueling enough during rides.
Seems very common from
Mhm.
as a non-nutritionist, just as a coach, when tell me what they ate, I'm like, oh, whew, you're gonna have easy gains because you're not putting any gas in the tank. So I love
Mhm.
that when people say that because it
For
makes us
sure.
look good as coaches, but it's really just like eat more stuff. You'll be
Yep. Yep.
faster. Before we jump into the nutrition stuff, so I think you've been going to Belgium the past 5 years, if I look correctly. Tell me
Mhm.
about that. What's that like going from U.S. racing across the pond?
I mean, I really love it, which is probably why I keep going back. This past year, I went for the longest amount of time that I've ever gone. I went for almost 3 months. It was 2.5.
Mm.
And I did 12 out of 14 of the World Cups, maybe 11. I was supposed to do 12, but I kept getting sick this year. So that was really tough and really
Ah,
challenging. I ended up being sick for like 4 weeks. My fitness plummeted. Um,
no.
yeah, that was really rough because it was really hard to make such a big commitment to be there so long. And then, your fitness is so much lower than you want it to be. But it was really fun. I definitely don't regret it. The courses, so like people always ask what the differences are from here to there. So like the courses are more technical because it rains in Belgium all the time, or it mists. There's always more mud. Just the features they
Mm.
have, more off cambers, always more technical, way more competitive. Like here, sometimes in UCI races, like you kind of like you let your friend pass, and then you might pass. Like, we're just nicer, but they're like really competitive. Like even if you're racing for last place, like just really competitive. Like people will chop you for last place. Um, Bigger fields. I mean, that's also because there's not the separate U23 category for the World Cup. So like, especially for the popular races, like very commonly like 70 women in the race. Um,
Mm.
the spectators, just there's tons of spectators because like that's their football. So like people pay to go to the races so that also like as athletes you don't have an entry fee, which I also think is nice,
Mm.
because those definitely add up, but it's because they make money off spectators. um and then the other main difference is just how close the races are, because I mean the countries are so much tinier there, and so many of them are in Belgium and the Netherlands. So like a 2-hour drive is far, where
Hmm.
here it would be nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wild. I was always amazed. I lived in Belgium briefly at the end of getting my master's, and was shocked at how many people knew cyclists and would just
Yes.
start chatting up about cycling. There's some people, like random people, that knew way more than I did. I was like, this is wild. They're like, yeah, it was like Philippe Gilbert was still stomping around then, and they just would love talking about that. And I was like, this is so
Mhm.
cool. People actually like the sport that I like.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So are you going to go back this year?
Yes, yes. I'm not exactly sure when or how long. Most likely just for the Christmas period. I don't know if I want to commit to the whole 3 months again. Because like to do that, like I had to miss nationals and stuff. And I don't
Mm,
know that I want to do that again. I couldn't afford to go back and forth twice. So I just made the
mhm.
commitment to go really for a long time. So most likely just the Christmas period, probably for like a month and a half or something.
Where do you stay when you go there?
Uh,
What
the
town or city?
chainstay, the chainstay is in Oudenaarde, which to locals
Okay.
I'm always pronouncing that wrong.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
but that's where I always stay.
yeah, I hung out with Dutch people, and it was towards the end of 3 months, and we'd be out, and I was like, "Oh, you guys like slipped back into Dutch. Can we speak English?" And they're like, "Oh, you don't know the language yet?" Just laughed. I was like, the pronunciation is quite hard. I've been saying J's as J's for the past first month, so
Yep.
yeah, no, it's terrible. That I love that summation, because it really helps to better understand like the challenges. And actually, my last Belgian question would be, what do you think you need to improve on then before you go back this year?
I mean, for me, it starts. It's always the starts.
Mm,
I just get stressed with starting like so many more people than here, but also like I'm much further back because it's the best people
hmm
in the world. So here I'll be the first row or maybe the second row, but there I'm like fourth or fifth or sixth. Um,
mm.
so just the starts and the aggressive starts and that's always what I need to work on for.
So what is it? Go even deeper in that, because how, like, if there's people in front of you, you can only go like, is it being more aggressive? Is it being more cutthroat? Is it being just more watts? Like, what would help you actually improve that start?
Right. So I think this year, definitely the lack of watts hurt me because I was so sick. I did not have a good VO2. So I think like
Mm,
already like dying on the first lap, even though the first lap of a cyclocross race is always going to be hard, but not having the power. Um,
right.
definitely that. Definitely being more aggressive. I'm just too nice and just being more comfortable near people and like, trying to go in the gaps. Um, so those are the two main things.
I can see you being too nice. You seem very nice. Very like,
Yes.
oh, yep, my bad. Were you going there? I'll go back here. Yeah, go
Like
ahead.
I'm the person that says
After
sorry to
you.
people in races, and then I'm like, oh my god, Emily, we're in a race.
What can we do to make you more aggressive? We'll have to think about that. That's cool. Well, that's awesome. That's amazing experience. Yeah, I wish I had raced in Europe at some point, but didn't happen. Let's get into the nutrition side, and you had kind of thrown around a couple topics that you hear about and are interested in talking about. I have a few, and I think the first one, fasted training. You threw this bullet point over to me, and I'm very curious your thoughts on fasted training and maybe the different applications to different disciplines.
Okay, so I mean, I have a summary of what I think about it. I think that there needs to be more research with a lot of nutrition topics that out there. I think people jump onto like the latest trend or fad when there's not enough research to back it up, or they jump onto this trend for like fasted training, but there's all these other simple nutrition things that they could be doing that would have so many more benefits than jumping into the fasted training that doesn't have enough research. So like research has suggested that fasted training can modify like your metabolic responses and so that you'll burn more fat. There's three main ways to achieve this. So like you can either do fasted workouts in the morning. You could do two workouts in one day with not a lot of glycogen restoration in between. Um, or you could do what's the last one? Just a low carb, high fat diet in general. However, I think that the risk it's more risky than the reward
Mm,
because I do a lot with athletes that have RED, so relative energy deficiency, and doing something like this can make you more prone to REDs. So that's not going to be good. That's not going to improve your performance. For people that aren't familiar, REDS used to be called the female athlete triad, but then they changed it to REDS, to relative energy deficiency syndrome. Basically, it's when your energy intake, like what you're eating, isn't matching what you're putting out, your day to day activity, and your exercise chronically. Like that can happen to you for like a day or two, but chronically. So those methods that I was talking about would help the athlete burn more fat. But the risks that I think, so your high intensity performance might be compromised. So that's something to consider. If you're exercising while glycogen depleted, it can increase your cortisol and your stress hormones. So like that's not great. And then the last one, it can lead to low energy availability chronically, which would lead to REDS. So I think that some people jump on this when I do think maybe there is potential for it, especially in the ultra endurance and endurance athletes. But I think there needs to be more research. And then I also think if someone is going to do this, like they need to be someone like that has access to more testing and stuff to make sure that they're doing it safely. Like Vanderpool or someone that has a lot of like scientists and stuff that like make sure you're not
Mhm.
causing more harm than benefit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. You need a squad behind you before you
Yes.
go and do this. Yeah. I also heard too that then when you start taking on carbs, it can be harder to utilize carbs. So people are like, oh, well, I'm going to go get better at burning fat. And then I still want to be able to burn carbs really well. And I
Right.
think you kind of alluded to that with losing the top end. But yeah, if you can't turn on the glycolytic system and you have any type of
Yeah.
racing whatsoever, the whole point of doesn't matter how much fat you're going to burn at that point, you're screwed.
Yeah, and so I
So,
think, like I think the timing is also important, like, when in your training you're doing that. Like, if you're able to do this successfully, obviously maybe more during the base season, but, not when you're trying to do high intensity intervals or VO2.
mhm.
I think more research is needed, and I think there's more things athletes can focus on that will give them bigger gains
Oh,
first.
people are always tripping over wait, what is it? Tripping over dollars to pick up a couple cents? Like,
Oh,
they're passing by the easy things and
yes.
trying to get into this, like, really niche, weird thing that so and so is talking about. I should go do that. I'd also be curious what new future studies talk about, like, how long do these I guess we could call them gains or adaptations last
Mhm.
for because say you do this during base and then you're like, okay, it's time to start building and I'm going to go through the next 6 weeks and I'm going
Right,
back to my normal diet. And then you go race 8 weeks after you stop doing this.
right.
Are all those quote unquote adaptations gone now? I don't think we know that yet.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
I okay. I love where you went with that because I was curious. I'm like, well, I'm gonna be so surprised if she's really into fasted training. But that's what I love. I had no clue what you're gonna say, so that's great. Yeah, I think carbs are important in
Mhm,
so many ways, and I think the last thing I would say on this is I had an interesting conversation with. It's a long story that I won't get into, but I had some back pain, and one guy had convinced me that it was too much inflammation from carbs. And granted, he's from like a carnivore camp; he's not an athlete, but it was a very interesting and open conversation. And I've just been like listening to other athletes that have reached out that are more low carb
mhm,
and I think there could be some benefit to using that technique sparingly so that
mhm,
we don't just become overly carb because there has definitely been a point in my life where I was way too carb
mhm,
dependent and even just eating too many carbs in general would retain tons of water. I could notice it in big gravel races. I had to pee like all the time in the beginning of the race, which I think was just way too many carbs. And I don't know if you know the name Tim Podlegar. He's a sports scientist. He actually works with Bora Hansgrohe now. He's from the UK though. Well, he's from Slovenia, but works in the UK. And he was on a podcast and he had been talking about a study he's working on. And I had reached out to him and we'll post our podcast. This one will probably be in April. I think he's like a couple weeks beforehand. So it'll be out by the time this one comes
mhm,
out. And they're finding that like your glycogen is the preferred method of fuel, no matter how many carbs you're eating. And that if we're going super high carb early in a ride, like 100, 120 grams right off the bat, it can inhibit our fat
mhm,
utilization. So I think like this all comes back to balance
mhm,
and
mhm,
not going crazy in one way, not going crazy
mhm,
in the other. So I don't know. I think balance is a good thing, and it sounds
mhm.
like this might be a good area to follow that. Let's. So I'm not going to have a ton to offer to this next topic, but I think it's super important that we hit on it. So I'm glad you brought it up. Altering training while tracking the menstrual cycle. what are the big things that jump out to you for this? And I'm really curious. I've read, what is it? I'm blanking on the name now. I want to call her Emily, and that's not her name. She, Roar,
Yes, Stacy Sims.
Stacy Sims.
Mhm.
And there was another book that somebody at the Training Peaks coaching seminar a few years had recommended. I can't recall that one, but I've had some athletes who have been open about discussing this with a male coach,
Uh-huh.
and it's been very educational. But I would love to hear kind of what do you hear come up, and like what are some takeaways that athletes can take to
Yeah.
implement into their own training?
Okay. So I probably differ from uh maybe a lot of like the female coaches out there. This is another topic I think we need more research. So
Cool.
like as you know, for females, they're very underrepresented in studies and scientific research. Part of it is, or I guess the big reason is because of the menstrual cycle and the hormones. It's hard to control. Like it's easier to do studies on males. Their hormones are much more consistent. So there needs to be more research on females. A really interesting study just came out, which maybe you can put the link in the notes. A lady, and I can't remember the exact name. She did. It was a study on resistance training in females, and so I know that's not the same as endurance athletes, but that found that like tracking the menstrual cycle and altering resistance training during that, like strength training, was not, it didn't, it wasn't a positive effect. So I thought that was really interesting. And there was a podcast I listened to on that. So I
Let
guess
me ask
my,
you another question on that. When you say not a positive effect, meaning tracking it wasn't a positive, there
right,
was
like
nothing
there was
good from tracking
no,
it? No difference?
like tracking it and training and changing training based off where they were in the cycle
Okay.
did not lead to increased gains.
Okay.
Was my understanding, but I would
Right.
definitely recommend reading this study.
Yeah,
Um,
send me that. I will put the link in the show notes for sure.
okay, so my conclusions. Well, first, more research is needed. Um, One thing that was really interesting to me in that study was the apps and stuff that you use, and also listening to the podcast. The apps that you use to track your menstrual cycle, um, like they can give you an idea, but they're not super accurate. So, like for her
Mhm.
study, she would have women use like the test urine strips to see how like they're where they were in the cycle. So like that's pretty accurate, but like not a lot of people are going out and getting those and testing themselves.
Right.
So the apps are not super accurate. So you might be altering your training significantly when you might not be exactly in the phase, like the follicular or the luteal phase where you think you are.
Mhm.
Um, so the takeaways that I like to take from this, so like during the luteal phase, carbs and sodium may be more important for women. Like that has been potentially shown. Um, your body, you might need more carbs during this phase, but the point that I like to bring up is like you need carbs all the time when you're training. Like you shouldn't be ignoring carbs. So like you should
Mhm.
be well fueling your training all the time. The
Mhm.
second thing is during the luteal phase, it's thought that potentially sodium is more important. Um, I think that women should always pay attention to their hydration and sodium, regardless of what phase they're in, because of the women's smaller body size, lower sweat rates, and then sometimes longer competition times. Because like if a male and female are both doing like a 50-mile race, the women are probably going to be out there longer. Some of them are still going to be faster than the men, but because of that, sweating longer and because of a longer race time. So all of those factors are going to predispose women to hyponatremia. So my other point would just be like you want to pay attention to your hydration and how much sodium you need all the time. Maybe some days and others you find that you do need more salt, and like I think that's fine. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with that. um I guess like during the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, and I'm not an expert on this at all, because you're more bloated and you're retaining more free water, like that makes sense, you might need more sodium. um
Mhm.
so I think it's important to pay attention to how you feel as a female, whether you track your cycle or not, and just to keep in mind, some days you might feel good, some days you might feel bad. It could be because of your hormones, it could just be a bad day. The other
Mhm.
thing that I like to talk about with athletes, especially younger athletes that are interested in tracking their menstrual cycle, um, is I get worried, like, because they think that a couple days in their cycle are days they're supposed to feel bad, that they're gonna have, like, a race or something that's, like, something they wanna feel good for, they're aiming for, and then it gets in their head and it's a placebo effect. So that makes me
Self-fulfilling
nervous
prophecy.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and I'm not saying by any reason that it's wrong to track your menstrual cycle, and if you alter your training and that works for you, like, that's definitely something you should do, but I don't think it's something that you should feel like you have to do.
hmm it's very encouraging to hear this. So this was probably maybe 2 years ago. At that point, I think I had six female athletes, and five of them were down to like chat about this openly. And we looked back at, okay, let's look at some PR days. Let's look at some big mega rides, like races where you felt
Uh-huh.
amazing. And there was never really a huge consistency.
Like,
And
random.
it was kind of random. And
Mhm.
so then I was like, okay, maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way. And so I would ask each one, like, which phase do you normally feel strongest? And even against like what the textbook said, the answer wasn't always the same. And I'm definitely not going to tell a woman like, okay,
Yeah,
well, you're wrong because this is what the textbook said. And these were not cat 5 athletes. I think I had a cat 3, a cat I think she was a cat too. It's always hard. It was hard for me to remember because they do like all the same races.
right,
Um, Another woman who had been racing, she was just got her cat 3, but had been riding for like 7 years, like knew herself.
right,
So it wasn't new athletes that like weren't in tune with their body and working out either.
right.
So then I had connected a few of them and was like, hey, what do you like? Do you guys think this is even worthwhile to track? And people were like, not really, because it's just like you said, even if I'm in a phase where I'm supposed to feel great, sometimes I don't. And I don't like,
Mhm,
maybe that's the hormones. Maybe, like you said, it's just a bad day. It more created confusion and sometimes doubt in what they should be doing then,
uh-huh,
as opposed to going back and listening to their body and being like, oh, today is not a day that I'm smashing VO2. Like, I'm just going to go cruise endurance. Let's reschedule this
right.
for 3 days out or whatever. So, yeah, that's awesome feedback, I think, coming from you with so much experience as an athlete and someone deals with other women and friends that you talk to. So, yeah, listen to the body. It's going to
Right,
most
like, I
likely
feel
lead
like
you.
in this modern day, sometimes we're overwhelmed with data and feedback and things to
Mm,
track,
yeah.
and the same thing with, like, I talk about, like, getting back in touch with your hunger and fullness cues, and, like, I think we just get so away from listening to our bodies, and we don't need to always go by, like, what the apps and everything are telling
Yeah.
us.
That's why I'm not a fan of Whoop for athletes. I think it
Mhm,
is way off, and it'll tell people that they should not feel recovered on some days.
yep,
And I've had athletes that, are like a 9 to 5 are super busy and they're like, oh, they do feel tired, but then the app lets them know that they're tired. And
yep,
so it's sort of like kicking you when you're down. And I'm like, what is
mhm,
that telling you that you don't already know? You don't feel good. Do you
yep.
need that thing to remind you how bad you feel? Like, go to bed early tonight and like, let's go.
Yep, yep. I agree, like, the only thing I have found if it's beneficial, if there's college students and they don't understand how drinking is affecting their sleep and performance, and, like, that has been helpful before. Um,
I needed that. I think everybody should listen to the Andrew Huberman alcohol podcast.
mhm.
It's frightening. And I have a lot of regret after that one, even though I tried not to live with that. But what's so you've brought up carbs a bunch. I'm curious your thoughts on carb loading, or even we
Okay,
could step away from that, which kind of sometimes is like a triggering phrase for people, like how to place your macros or how to think about your macros. And I think you have great experience that if this is kind of like a lot of questions at once, like maybe we talk road longer races and then like cross shorter races, so we can just make it like two buckets: road, gravel, cross,
okay,
short rides. What's your thoughts on carbs in those contexts?
okay. Well, maybe first, like, I can just, like, briefly touch on some things to think of for carb loading because, like, people do ask me that. So, like, it used to be thought that you needed to, like, decrease training for, like, a whole week while increasing carb consumption, but now it's thought that you can kind of achieve this same effect in just, like, 2 days. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
most people before, like, an event that they wanna do well at, they're probably decreasing training 2 days before. And then, like, I like to point out, like, carb loading doesn't mean overeating. It doesn't mean like eating until you're just stuffed full of carbs. Like you just want to focus on carb choices. So like you still like I always recommend like for most athletes 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks per day. So like those 2 days before an event, you want to make sure you're having a good source of carbs at all of those meals and the snacks if you can. So like for example, like the night before a cyclocross race or even a gravel event, like my go-to meal is always like spaghetti, um usually with some sort of red meat like beef, red sauce, and like salad. I'll have a smaller side salad because like my stomach is sensitive and vegetables can bother people, especially raw vegetables, the day before an event. So I'll decrease that. And then like I'll make sure like I'm having a good portion of spaghetti, but you know, like, and I'll have meat and the red sauce and cheese, but I won't just like load tons of it on. I'll make sure I'm focusing more on the noodles. Also, while you're carb loading and eating more carbs in these couple days before, like if you're someone that has a lot of stomach problems during races, you might want to focus more on like the quote unquote processed carbs or like the white rice, white bread, white potatoes, just because of the decreased fiber.
Mm.
Whereas most of the time, the rest of the time, I tell people to focus on whole grains. But this is a time where you might want to have the more processed stuff because it has less fiber. Another thing to consider, like for instance, sometimes like someone might have like a really nice salad for lunch, like a chicken salad with like greens and um, chicken for the protein, but like that's missing carbs. So like, but anytime I would want you to have carbs. So like make sure you have like a grain with it or toast or something like that. So I think that it's just something that you should keep in your mind before an event, but you don't need to stress about it. Like for example, maybe don't have fried chicken the night before a really important race because there's no way you're getting enough carbs if you're eating fried chicken.
Hmm. I think when you said focus on the noodles, I think at points in my life, I ate way too many carbs before a race. I mean, I still raced really well, so I don't want to like poo poo on it for some. I mean, when
Right.
people are like, "Oh, 12 grams per kg," it's so many carbs, and I find that it's hard not to
Yeah.
overeat at that point because it's just an
Yeah.
insane amount. With that said, now with more of this, information coming about even in the more micro on that day, if you're eating too many carbs early, you might really be blunting your ability to use fat. If you're doing that much carb loading for a gravel race, are we hampering our ability and only focus on carbs? You're going to run out of carbs at some point during a
Right.
7 hour race.
Right.
Or, so I think there's like so many things that I could have maybe optimized, but I think when I instead come back to what you're saying, like lean my diet towards carbs. I don't have to go crazy mode, but
Right.
yeah, have the extra bowl of rice, have maybe a bowl of cereal, you know. And I think it's always interesting too because then there's athletes swear by sugar, other people are anti-sugar. I know it all breaks down the same, but some people think it makes them
Mhm.
feel good, some people makes it feel bad. So I just, man, I wish we had a little sensor that, like, oh, your glycogen is all filled, and up this like just all these little meters on us to really know everything that's happening. And at some point in life, I'm sure we will, but I don't know, in our lifetime, I think it'd be really useful for sports situations like this. So would you believe in any of those recommendations, like grams per kg, if for the very neurotic athlete, or do you think, like you said, you're stressing it too much and overdoing it?
I just think they're really high. Like I don't know when you like do the math and see like how many carbs you need to be eating, like it's so high. Like I
It's
just
insane.
yes. Um, so to me, it just seems like too much. Like I guess there was some study and that's how those numbers came about, but I just sometimes I don't understand where they came from. Um, I just feel like if you're eating that much and that many carbs, that can also bother your stomach. So, I mean, I think the most important thing to do is to practice and see what works for you and like see what you did when you have good races.
Yeah. And there are definitely days where I have not carb loaded and I've been fine. So
I mean,
I've
there's other
reduced
factors
big
too,
time.
like
Yeah.
sleep, stress. There's so many things that can affect performance.
That brings up an amazing point. in that the nutrition does get so much of the focus when it's someone goes, oh,
Yeah,
well, I ate all this and I felt terrible, but you
that's
slept
true.
5 hours.
That's true. I mean, sometimes I wish people focused on nutrition more because I feel like people spend so much money on like no offense, coaches, equipment,
Hello?
et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like also you need to focus on your nutrition. So I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like I think they're all important. I think the coaches are also important.
Like, burn. Damn. No, I agree. I personally think there's too much focus on the tech. Um, people want to. Somebody one time asked me many years ago, okay, so if I buy a power meter, will I get faster? It's like,
Oh, that. Okay, I thought you
you
meant
don't
technical
get it.
skills. Like I think technical skills are also important
Oh,
too.
super important. No, no, no. Tech. Yeah. Just like I
Yeah,
bought these wheels. I'm going to win everything now, right?
technology.
It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
you'll be a little bit faster.
for sure.
Okay. Carb loading. Well, since we're on, and I kind of was throwing out some mistakes I made, let's talk more generally. Well, let me ask you this curveball. What do you think about since we have a limited amount of glycogen that we can store? And that's the other thing. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
where do all these carbs go? If we can only store between I don't, for me, I think when I looked it up, it would be like in the ballpark of like 400 to 600 grams of glycogen. So it's like,
Okay,
am I eating too many? Can I not even store all this glycogen from the carbs
right.
that I'm eating? But all that said, say there's a limited amount of glycogen that can be stored and then a limited amount that we can take on and use for
Uh-huh.
fuel. Why do we not focus more on not being more fat adapted, but finding ways to like increase that flux or like the bottleneck? Say, I think it's like,
Right,
I'm going to screw up the units, but like 1 gram per something of fat is like a baseline when going hard at VO2 max.
right.
And do you know of anything that's like we can get better at burning fat at higher intensity? Because there has to be a variation in athlete, and
Right,
that's why I've had athletes before that don't feel good carb loading,
right.
and we're like, dude, it doesn't work for you. Don't do it.
I mean,
Um,
everyone is different. I mean, I don't know. Like, I personally don't know. I feel like that's just something that there needs to be more research.
yeah, no, that's great. I mean, that's why I think, and I don't know, I feel sometimes poo poo saying this, but there's so much research that still needs to happen. And in
Mhm.
the past, I want to say in the past 5 years, like I started cycling seriously in 2009. And I felt like when new things came out, there was always like new questions and like, okay, this
Mhm.
is only one study, but let's consider this, da da da. And in the past 5 years, I feel like something comes out and it's just like dogma, which is what you started with. People hear of a fad and they're like, oh, this is the thing. We figured it out. It's like
Mhm.
there are so many factors that affect that thing. Like
Mhm.
I don't think we don't know much about ourselves as human athletes yet. There's so much under the hood that we have
Right,
no idea what's going on in order to predict performance. So
right.
yeah, no, that's a great answer. Like we just don't know. The reason I ask is there's a company I've been chatting with, and I'm getting over this injury, so I haven't fully been able to test the product, but it's called Vespa, and that's their whole thing. And unfortunately, some of the studies that they had going on in the lab, it got shut down during COVID, and the head guy who's running it is now dealing with I don't know if they want me to say this on camera, so I won't. Has a family situation going on, so they're
Okay.
waiting to restart this. But in the first few athletes that they had go through, their VO2 max was increasing by taking this product, and
Interesting.
it's all because you can use more fat at higher intensity. So I'm
Huh.
like, this is going to be crazy
Yeah.
if because they're not anti-carb, they're don't go insano with the carbs
Right,
and use
right,
them, but get more efficient at fat burning. And
right.
so I'm anxious to see what they can come up with. I've used the product a few times and it's weird how good I feel on less carbs, but I'm still pro carb. So it's
Uh-huh.
like finding that balance. I think it's just
Right,
that's just a
right.
wrench to throw in everything. But okay, let's talk more generally. What are common athlete nutritional mistakes that you see people make when they come in the door day one and you're
Mhm.
like, you don't say it to them, but you're like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this.
Okay. Okay, so it's kind of wide variety. I mean, because we've talked
Good.
about carbs so much, one of them is not having enough carbs during training. So I typically recommend 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. I don't think everyone needs to be right at 90. If you have a very teeny tiny person, they might feel good at 60. Um,
Mhm.
I typically, I know I don't recommend going over 90 unless you've practiced and you feel good doing that, because I feel like a lot of the research shows people can't absorb and digest more than 90 grams of carbs per hour. So fueling during rides, especially like masters athletes who are busier during the week and they're just doing longer rides on the weekend, I feel like they try to get by without fueling well, but they should still be fueling well on those longer weekend rides. Another mistake, not enough electrolytes, particularly sodium. So like they'll either have just water in their bottles. So like any
Mm.
time that it's either really hot out or you're doing a ride, like, over an hour and a half, or if you're doing a hard workout, regardless of the duration, I think that you should have electrolytes and sodium in your bottle. A very,
And
very,
sorry, I want to jump in here.
yeah,
What's the sodium general rec, which I
yeah,
realize
that's
is
about what I was
super,
going to say. So
super
the
sketch.
Yep. So the very, very like general recommendation, and I like to caution that this is a general recommendation because it depends on your body size, your sweat rate. If you have salty sweat, is 300 to 700 milligrams of sodium per hour. That also will vary depending on the temperature outside. So like, in the winter, you might feel like you need less
Mm.
sodium per hour than in the summer. I think a lot of athletes say they don't tolerate heat well, which I know you need to adapt to heat and high temperatures, but I also think some of them it's just because they're not getting enough sodium in.
Mm.
So to keep that in mind, to keep in mind if you had like a really hard workout in the summer, um, like, or like a 3-4 plus hour ride and you just feel really dehydrated, it's more effective to rehydrate with sodium, carbs, and fluids, or like, electrolytes, carbs, and fluids, instead of just drinking plain water. So like if you drink a ton of plain water, and like you don't have to drink like any sort of drink mix you're using, you can eat salty snacks like pretzels, tortilla chips, etc. But that will help you rehydrate more effectively than just chugging tons and tons of plain water. You're going to pee out all your electrolytes and dehydrate yourself further.
Do we need all the other electrolytes that are listed on some drink mixes? I know this is sort of split right now. Others have magnesium
Right.
and I can't remember the other ones off the top of my head, but it's like sodium, magnesium, and blah, blah, blah.
I mean,
I'm reading now that it's just sodium. Where are you at with this?
right. I mean, I think sodium is the big one to pay attention to during training, but I feel like we also lose magnesium in our sweat. And I mean, I take magnesium threonate, a supplement, personally. I try not to recommend just broadly to all my athletes that they take supplements. But I do recommend regular blood work, getting all your electrolytes tested. And I definitely think magnesium threonate is something to consider. I do think that's one of the supplements that shows promise.
What
Um,
other supplements? What's in your stack? What else are you rolling with?
I guess that's a good
Well,
question.
before we get to that, did we hit what? Let's finish up the nutritional mistakes. Sorry, I like to
Um,
jump around a little bit too much.
Yeah, those are the big ones. I think the other two that I wanted to point out was still eating well on your recovery days. I think a lot of people think because they're not training a lot that they don't need to eat that much, but what I like to point out is like you might have just had a huge training week or block or weekend or even day, and like sometimes it's hard to eat enough on those big days, so you need to eat well on your recovery day to make up for it.
Mm.
Um, and just to recover. Like if you don't eat well, you're not going to recover.
Yes, and I think that was my biggest mistake of
Mhm.
when I was too pro carb on the days that my body's really trying to rebuild. I wasn't eating enough protein, and I'm 80 to 82 kgs, and so there might like I might maybe would have a day where I'm like 70 grams of protein. And I'm like, damn, I'm trying to rebuild that.
Right.
I need to up that. So I'll start with like a 5 egg omelet, and that just gets me out the gates going pro. But I also think there was a hyper obsession of protein for a while,
There's
and
a
it
hyper
all comes
obsession with
back.
everything. Like I just think
Yeah,
everything in
that's how I
moderation.
live my life too. So it's like it's a double problem.
You need all the macronutrients, carbs, protein, and fat. Also, don't leave out
What
fat.
about ketones? Is that a macronutrient now? Ketones?
No, no, there's just the three macronutrients still.
All right. The where are you at with ketones?
I I think there needs to be more research. I'm not super comfortable with them yet.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, fair. What's okay? So we hit on those.
Did you
We hit
want to
on the
talk about
sodium.
supplements?
Yeah, I want to hear about supplements. What's in the
Okay.
stack? What do you take personally, and then what are the like,
Okay.
even if it's something weird that has no research, but you're like, I feel like this is good, and then what do you actually recommend to people?
Okay, yeah, because I think like sometimes you can take supplements and it's just the placebo effect, but the placebo effect is real, so it's making you feel better. That's okay. So I guess athletes need to make sure that they're getting good quality supplements. So since supplements aren't regulated by the FDA, like anything can be in them, like dirt. So ideally, you want them to be like the NSF, like informed sport. Like, are you familiar with that at
Yeah.
all?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. I was
making
gonna bring
sure.
that up.
Yes, okay, and you can talk more about that if you would like. But making sure, yeah, I mean, point out what you wanted to say.
No, I was gonna say that you might be taking something, and if you are an athlete that could get drug
Yes,
tested, it could be extremely embarrassing for you that you took a supplement. And it actually has me thinking because I think now in getting something off Amazon, I'm taking rhodiola. I don't know if it's rosea.
yeah, good.
Um, I actually think I failed to look at what's on that bottle, so I should double check. But yeah, that would be terrible. Like you do all this
Yep.
training, do all this racing, and then it's because you took a stupid supplement that they put. What? Here's a question: what would they put in those that would be banned? Do you know that?
I'm not familiar, but I think part of the issue would be they could be in a facility that makes something else that is banned, and so it's just cross contamination.
Okay, that's always confusing. That makes way more sense. I'm like, why would they be
Like trying to
fill? I thought
sneak.
people were getting something that had like filler in it. So okay, that makes me even more suspect than when people say that, and that's how they. I mean, I guess the chance of that happening though has to be super
But
slim.
it could
I
still
mean, it'd be
happen.
terrible if it did, but I know people.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't. Yeah, that's
So
okay.
there's
Supplements. What are you taking?
well, so there's the for checking that. So you need to make people need to make sure their supplements are third party regulated because that means like someone's inspecting them, making sure they're good quality. So like and like what's in them is actually what's in them. So like the and I can also send this to you, but it's like the NSF sport thing is the it regulates it, and then like informed choice is
Mhm.
another third party regulator. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah.
Okay. um so which one was the one we already talked about? Oh yeah, so magnesium threonate. I do think that is a helpful to take. I think a lot of people lose magnesium in their sweat, and then if they have like restless legs or a lot of cramping, and they think it's like because they need more sodium or something, I think sometimes it can be needing more magnesium, particularly magnesium threonate. That one doesn't cause like the as much of the laxative effect like
So I was gonna
magnesium.
say the poops.
Yeah,
Yeah. You
I think
what?
magnesium threonate is better tolerated and is less likely to just act as a laxative. Everyone's different, so like don't try it right before a big event, but see how it affects you. Um, Fish oil is another one that I take. I don't think as Americans that we eat enough omega threes. Um,
Mm,
and in particular in fish oil, the DHAs. So that is protective. That can have a protective effect on your brain. It's good for brain health. So as cyclists, you have a chance of getting a concussion. So like if you take fish oil, and there are vegan omega-3 supplements as well, because I know not everyone or vegetarian. It can actually have a protective effect on your brain if you're taking the fish oil regularly, but then it's also good after concussion. So I just take fish oil all the time. But then like if I were to get a concussion, there's like a loading protocol, and like you want to take like it's a very large amount of fish oil or omega threes. I always say fish oil. Um, so I think that's a good one to take. I don't think we eat enough fish. Maybe people in Alaska. I was lucky to get to go to Alaska last year, and they ate so much salmon. They might be the few people that don't need to take a fish oil supplement.
love
Um,
it.
I
Was it
think
salmon every day?
yes, yes.
Multiple times?
Sometimes, yes.
Okay.
I think this isn't one that I think everyone needs to take, but I think everyone needs to get their vitamin D levels checked. Like
Mm,
the majority of Americans are deficient in vitamin D. I do recommend getting blood work once a year. So, in asking your doctor to check your vitamin D, I see so many athletes that are deficient. Like, some of them, like if they have reds, that could be the cause of it. But sometimes, like, I think either maybe sunblock or like maybe pollution, like for whatever reason, we're not getting enough from the sun. So get that one checked and considering taking that. I think another one that athletes should always get checked is their ferritin. So your ferritin is your body's stores of iron. So you can detect a deficiency when you're iron deficient, but before you're full blown anemic, so you can recover from it before you've dug like a giant hole. So typically, athletes, if you get blood work, the normal range, it'll say you're normal if you're just above 20, and I always forget the units. But female athletes ideally want to be above 35, and male athletes want to be above 40 for your ferritin. I think that's an important thing to get checked if you're an endurance athlete once a year. You have to ask your doctor to check it unless you've had a history of anemia. They're not just going to check it for you.
Okay.
Especially if you're feeling tired, cold, anything like that. But I also recommend getting blood work when you feel good and like asking for those things even when you feel good so that you know what normal is for you.
Makes sense. I need to go do it. I'm trying to think of the last time I had blood work. It's probably been a while. Any others? Those are your favorite?
I mean, I am a big believer in probiotics, but I do think there needs to be more research. I'm sure for me, it's also just like the placebo effect. But I do take a probiotic also.
Okay. What's something that you've changed your mind on in the past 6 months?
I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I'm like, I am struggling to think of something for that.
Or what have you learned? What's something that you feel like you've maybe uncovered? Or let's even go down this, that it needs more research, but a little hunch you've got.
Hmm.
You'll have to think about that. So here's mine that's not nutritional based,
Okay.
because I would say over the past 3 years, I've had some different influences in like threshold training. And I came up in training. This should be a separate video, so I should save this. But um, I feel like old school, it got labeled old school, like constant power. And then it was like, oh, everyone's talking about over-unders. And my former coach was talking about over-unders, and we did those. And then I kind of felt like my body as a human adapted, and I was like looking for that over, and I would go under, and I had a harder time like pegging it on a climb. And so my latest theory, or thing I think I've changed my mind on in training, is over this past year, I feel like in working with my coach now, we found a really good groove through like early builds of more not as hyper over unders and some longer steady state stuff and some kind of going back to tempo work. And I think then the shift to over unders is kind of like it takes you to your next level. So the constant power kind of brings you up to where you're physiologically just at, and then to tweak out that last bit of like whether it's you're increasing your lactate clearance capabilities or it's the mental, like if I'm riding at 500 for these short bursts, I'm more likely to be able to hold 440, 420, 400. And so I think there's some psychological aspect to that also, and it's more
Right.
racy. So I don't know, that's something I changed my mind on. I'm like kind of pumped about it because it I don't know. I think it's just a puzzle that we haven't cracked yet. And I think training with power is still so new that we're going to learn a lot of stuff. But I
Right.
think the methodologies will slowly, like, we'll learn better ways of doing everything. That's what I've loved about this podcast. Everybody has a different way. I mean,
Yeah.
the number one thing is consistency.
Right.
Um,
Right. Like people are
but there's
definitely going to disagree with my training based off the cycle and um the low carb training.
I don't know. And granted, I've only had experience with 5 athletes that wanted to talk to me about it, but that was totally consistent with what you said, and it created more confusion. So I don't
Mhm.
know. And I know that from what I had gathered in trying to better understand female athletes, just because somebody puts a book out, everybody in that field does not agree with them on that. So that was just like anybody, like, so it was
Right.
interesting to hear.
Right.
But yeah, I have no firsthand experience. So I was just kind of leaning on what athletes were willing to share with me.
Right. And
Um,
it's not even that I disagree. I just think in both of those areas more research is needed, and everybody's bodies are different and different things can work for different people.
100%. What's any other topics you want to hit on before we close this out? I really appreciate you doing this. It was awesome. You have a wealth of knowledge and appreciate you sharing it.
Thank you. Can I just talk about my business very briefly?
Yeah, usually I plug you at the end. Let's go.
Okay.
That's
So
usually my last question. I'm like, okay, how do we keep up with Emily Shields?
perfect.
So you have the website we're going to post.
Yep.
You're on Instagram. We're going to
Yep.
post that link. And then, yeah, talk some more about what you're doing.
Okay, so yeah, I will put in the website. It's Emily Shields Sports Nutrition. If you just want to stay in touch, I have a newsletter, and if you go to my website, it'll pop up to sign up for the newsletter. It's just monthly. There's recipes. There's just a topic. Like last month, I just did ride fueling. And if there's any hot topics, like I'll include those too. So I would encourage you to sign up for that. I am accepting new clients, so if anyone's interested in working with me, either check out my website or email me. We can also put that in the notes, but it's just Emily Shields RD for registered dietitian at gmail.com. And then I also do team presentations and group talks, so either via Zoom or depending where you're located, potentially in person. So if anyone has any questions, to definitely please reach out to me and we can see if we can something works.
Especially people in Hawaii who want to like fly you out. You're probably going to take that trip, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Whoever's in
Yep.
Hawaii, let's get her out there. Or
Um,
maybe we find a nice Belgian family who's like, "Oh, you should come stay with us for 3 months." And you're like, "Let's be sweet." I'm excited to see what you end up doing this year over in Belgium. And
Thanks.
I keep saying I got to get back there. It's been a few years, but what a great country. As you said, the environment is amazing for the cross races and then the Christmas races and
Mhm.
yeah, everything going on. Um, any last topics?
I mean, like with nutrition stuff, you can go on forever, but I
I
mean,
know. Well, we'll have to, as you get more questions from athletes,
mhm.
keep some questions that come up, and we should do another one in like 6 months or like before, maybe after you come back from Belgium. Or yeah, it'd be cool to circle back. And yeah, everybody check out the website. I'm definitely signing up for the newsletter. We'll post a link to the study if you can send me that, whatever link you want me to post on the NSF. And that's all I got. This was incredible, Emily.
Okay.
Everybody, sign up for the newsletter. We'll talk to y'all soon.